Frances Brookstone learnt she was to be married over breakfast. Not in so many words, of course. Her father was not a man who announced things bluntly. He preferred suggestion, expectation, and the quiet certainty that resistance was unnecessary. "The retreat will be well attended this year," the Duke of Brookstone said, folding his newspaper with deliberate calm. "Several families of consequence have already confirmed. Among them, Mr. Edmund Hawthorne." Frances's spoon paused midway to her lips. Her mother glanced up from her tea but said nothing. That silence was familiar. It was the sound of observation, not agreement. "I see," Frances replied carefully. Her father looked at her then, one dark brow lifting just slightly. "You remember Mr. Hawthorne?" "Unfortunately." "Yes," Frances said. "He has strong opinions about port." "And about food," the Duke added. "He speaks often of it, fondly. He is a man who appreciates a well-prepared table." Frances lowered her spoon. Her father continued, his tone conversational, almost indulgent. "It occurred to me that this would be an excellent opportunity for you to prepare your stew, the one you are so often praised for." There it was. The expectation settled over the table like a heavy cloth, smothering any remaining appetite. "You wish me to cook for him?" Frances said. "I wish you to make a good impression," her father corrected. "You are 23, Frances. It is time." Time, it seemed, was a weapon she had not known she was holding until it was taken from her. "I had thought," she said slowly, "that the cook assigned to our suite might—" "The cook prepares meals," the Duke said mildly. "You prepare memories." Beatrice looked up from her plate. "Is Mr. Hawthorne the one who smells like cheese?" "Beatrice," Frances said sharply. Timothy, 10 and already far too observant for comfort, tilted his head. "He talks a lot." "He talks enough," their father said, "and he listens to the right people." Frances pushed her chair back and rose. "If you will excuse me." Her father inclined his head, already reaching again for his paper. "Bring your herb basket to the retreat. Fresh is always best." Frances left the room without trusting herself to reply. The morning passed in a blur of packing and instruction. Thornley was not merely a house. It was spoken of in society as a season unto itself. A vast winter domain built to host the wealthiest families in Britain, its wings stretching so far that carriages were kept on the grounds to carry guests from one quarter to another. By midday, Brookstone House was in motion. Frances stood by the carriage window as trunks were loaded. Timothy climbed in first, Beatrice following with marmalade cradled against her chest, the cat's tail flicking in displeasure. "It takes 4 hours to reach it," Beatrice said, "and longer to cross it." Frances rested her gloved hand against the glass. "Once you arrive, you are there." If she prepared the stew as she always did, her father would be pleased. Mr. Hawthorne would be impressed. Conversations would follow. Arrangements would be made, and her future would close like a door locked from the outside. By late afternoon, they arrived. Thornley rose before them, not as a home, but as a world. Lantern-lit drives, multiple entrances, entire wings assigned to families of rank. Their own suite occupied part of the eastern wing, complete with private sitting rooms, servants' quarters, and a kitchen reserved solely for Brookstone use. "This is enormous," Beatrice whispered. "It is meant to be," their mother replied. Frances did not linger. She barely registered the room she stood in, or the voices passing beyond it. Her attention had already slipped elsewhere, forward to what awaited her later. The stew. The expectation of it pressed heavier than the evening itself. Everyone assumed it would be made, that it would be served, that it would do what it always did, and she knew with sudden clarity that when the time came, she would not be able to prepare it as expected. The thought unsettled her, not because it was reckless, but because it felt deliberate. "Frances," Beatrice's voice cut through her thoughts. Timothy appeared beside her, marmalade tucked under his arm. "Mother is asking for you," Beatrice said. Then more quietly, "You're not listening again." Frances blinked, the moment snapping shut. "Yes," she said. "I'm coming." That evening, Thornley, filled with voices and light, the house settling confidently into its purpose. She did not yet know that Mr. Hawthorne would never taste what was meant for him, nor that the man who would was the one she had loved in silence for years. Frances did not see the main entrance from her window. That was deliberate. The Brookstone wing lay farther east than most, quieter, older, reserved for families who preferred distance to display. From there, the retreat felt less like a stage and more like a city viewed from its edge. "Can you see anything?" Beatrice asked, climbing onto the window seat. Timothy joined her, marmalade tucked securely beneath his arm. "Carriages," he reported. "Lots of them." Frances crossed the room. From this height, the drive looked like a ribbon of light cutting through the snow-dusted grounds. Lanterns bobbed, wheels crunched. Voices carried faintly on the cold air. "They're all arriving at once," Beatrice said. "Like geese." "That's because this is the first gathering," Frances replied. "Everyone wants to be seen." Timothy frowned. "Why aren't we near them?" "Because Father prefers distance," Frances said. "And so do I." By late afternoon, the retreat was fully awake. Carriages moved within the grounds now, ferrying guests from wing to wing. Somewhere far off, laughter echoed from the western gardens. Music drifted faintly from the central hall. Frances stood with her friends near the eastern colonnade, cloaks wrapped tight. "This place feels bigger every year," Lady Amabel Radcliffe said, surveying the grounds. "I nearly needed a map to find you." "That's because you always go the wrong way," Lucinda Westcott said mildly. Verena Delafield's gaze was fixed on the distant drive. "Someone important has arrived." "How can you tell?" Amabel asked. "Because everyone just stopped talking." They turned together. A carriage, darker, unmarked by English crests, rolled slowly along the far drive. Footmen straightened. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Frances's breath caught. "No," she whispered. Amabel looked at her sharply. "Frances." The carriage halted. A man stepped down. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking him. "That's him," Lucinda said quietly. "The Prince of Denmark." Frances felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "He wasn't meant to attend," she said. "He never does." "Not last year," Amabel agreed, "or the year before." Verena glanced at Frances. "But you hoped?" Frances said nothing. She had hoped every year, for 4 years. She had never been introduced, never danced with him, never spoken more than a polite greeting across a crowded room. And yet, she had watched him, from balconies, from gardens, from the edges of rooms where she did not belong. He was taller than she remembered, broader, older, real. "He's changed," Lucinda murmured. "So have you," Amabel said gently. From the upper gallery of the eastern wing, 2 small heads appeared. "It's him," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "The prince." Timothy leaned farther out. "He's not coming this way." "No," Beatrice said. "He's too important." Frances folded her hands together. "He won't even know I'm here." Verena's eyes lingered on the distant figure. "That has never stopped destiny before." Frances huffed softly. "You sound ridiculous." "And yet," Verena replied, "here you are, trembling." Frances forced herself to look away. This was foolish, dangerous. She was here to impress Mr. Hawthorne, not to dream. As the first bell rang, calling guests to the informal welcome gathering, Frances straightened her shoulders. "Come," Lucinda said. "If we're late, people will talk." "They always do," Amabel replied cheerfully. As they moved off, Frances cast one last glance across the vast grounds. The Prince of Denmark had disappeared into the western wing, far away, out of reach, just as he always had been. By the 3rd morning, Thornley Retreat had revealed what it truly was. Not a holiday, not a visit, a proving ground. Frances learned this standing in the Calderon wing while her siblings argued at full volume behind her. "I'm telling you, Aurelius is going to win again," Beatrice declared, peering down the corridor as if victory might appear at the far end. They didn't win everything last year, Timothy replied. Bellator took fencing and riding. That's because Bellator is terrifying. They're meant to be, Timothy said patiently. That's their whole reputation. Francis turned. Reputation? Beatrice looked at her as though she'd asked what breakfast was. Francis, this is a retreat. Yes, Francis said. I'm aware. A competitive retreat, Beatrice corrected. The houses compete in everything, games, matches, performances. Father says people remember who wins long after they forget who danced with whom. Timothy nodded. House standings matter, invitations, alliances, who people take seriously. Francis absorbed that quietly. So that was it, not entertainment, evaluation. Outside the tall windows, carriages rolled across the frost-bright grounds toward the central courts. House banners hung from distant wings, their colors unmistakable. Aurelius gets the best arrival rote, Beatrice added. Crimson and gold, right by the grand halls. Everyone sees them. And Calderon? Francis asked. Timothy gestured down the long, quieter corridor. Far enough away that no one wanders in by accident. Francis smiled faintly. Strategic distance. They resumed walking, turning back toward their suite, the corridor narrowing as the noise faded behind them. Calderon felt composed, observant, less spectacle, more watching. She rounded the corner and nearly collided with a man walking just as quickly. Oh, he stopped instantly. Forgive me. Francis looked up. The Prince of Denmark stood before her. Not from across a lawn, not framed by music or spectacle. Just there, close enough that she could see the faint crease at his brow, the polish of his boots, the restraint in the way he stepped back to give her space. I should have watched where I was going, she said, curtsying properly. I hope I didn't. Not at all, he said. His voice was calm, courteous. Are you unhurt? I'm quite well, thank you. Behind her, Beatrice had gone silent. Completely. Timothy had frozen like a statue. The prince's gaze flicked briefly to the navy ribbon at Francis's sleeve. House Calderon. Yes. A quieter wing, he said. Easy to lose one's bearings. We prefer it that way, Francis replied. His mouth curved. Not quite a smile. I imagine you do. Beatrice found her voice. Your house, Aurelius. Indeed, he said. We're difficult to miss. Are you going to win the competitions again? Timothy asked solemnly. The prince considered him. Bellator will object. They always do, Timothy said. Everyone says Aurelius and Bellator are the real contest. And Calderon? The prince asked, glancing back at Francis. She answered evenly. We observe. And remember, Beatrice added. The prince inclined his head. Wise. A man stepped up behind him. His companion, reserved and efficient. Your Highness. He nodded, then looked back at Francis. I hope the retreat treats you well, he said. It has so far, she replied. That at least was true. Then perhaps we'll cross paths again, he said. The grounds have a habit of arranging such things. His gaze lingered. Not improper, not familiar, simply attentive. Then he bowed and moved on, crimson and gold disappearing down the corridor. Beatrice released a breath she had clearly been holding. Francis, Timothy whispered. He spoke to you. Francis pressed her hands together, willing her pulse to steady. He spoke to all of us. But as they resumed their walk toward their suite, she knew that wasn't entirely true, because the retreat had not changed. She had, and whatever came next would not be accidental. Francis returned to the Calderon suite in the early afternoon, the corridors quieter now that most guests had dispersed to their various engagements. Her parents were nowhere to be seen. Father will be cornered by someone important, Timothy said, shrugging out of his coat. Mother, too. That leaves us unattended, Beatrice said, attempting chair. It leaves us resting, Francis replied. She crossed to the window and loosened her gloves. The encounter from earlier still hummed beneath her skin, unresolved, unwelcome in its persistence. The suite smelled faintly of polish and winter flowers. Familiar. Ordered. Beatrice drifted toward the inner sitting room. Timothy examined the notices left on the table. Frances had just lowered herself into a chair when a sound broke the calm. A sharp, unsteady breath. Then a sob. Frances looked up. Beatrice. Her sister stood frozen in the doorway, eyes bright with tears. She's gone. Frances was on her feet instantly. Who is gone? Lily, Beatrice said, her voice breaking. She was asleep on the chair. I only turned my back for a moment. Timothy frowned. She wouldn't just... I looked everywhere, Beatrice rushed on. Under the settee, behind the screens, even in Frances's room. Frances steadied her. Slowly. Did anyone come in? The maid, Beatrice said. For the fire, and then the door. It was open. Timothy sighed. She slipped out. Beatrice pressed her hands to her face. She's never been beyond our wing. What if she gets lost? Frances took a breath. She had meant to rest, to sit quietly and let the day settle around her. Instead, she reached for her cloak. She won't go far, Frances said. Stay here. Tell Mother when she returns. I'll come, Beatrice insisted. No, Frances said gently. If Lily comes back on her own, she'll look for familiar voices. Beatrice hesitated, then nodded miserably. Frances moved quickly through the Calderon corridor, retracing the most likely path Lily would have taken, toward warmth, toward light, toward sound. The air changed as she stepped onto the terraces. Cooler, broader. The winter garden stretched wide, hedges trimmed into careful lines, lanterns already lit against the shortening day. Voices carried faintly from distant arcades. Lily, Frances called softly. Nothing. She followed the gravel path, scanning shadows, listening for the smallest sound. Her steps slowed as she neared the outer hedges, places Lily had never been allowed. A voice reached her first. Easy now. Frances stopped. A man crouched near the hedge, posture careful, one hand extended. In his arms sat Lily, indignant, unharmed, very much alive. Relief flooded Frances. There you are. The man looked up. The Prince of Denmark rose slowly, keeping Lily secure. She appeared quite certain she belonged here. Lily meowed in agreement. I'm sorry, Frances said, crossing the distance. She escapes when she shouldn't. I suspected, he replied. She attempted to convince me she was loyal to House Greenwood. Frances smiled, despite herself. She's Calderon through and through. He handed Lily over with care, allowing space, no unnecessary closeness. Lily immediately settled against Frances's shoulder. I'm grateful you found her, Frances said. The groundskeeper would not have been so kind. I thought it best to intervene, he replied. She has a strong will. So do some of us, Frances said. His gaze held hers, attentive, restrained, unmistakably aware. There's cricket this afternoon, he said after a moment. Aurelius against Bellator. So I've heard. It draws attention, he continued. You may wish to attend. Frances hesitated. She had not planned to. She had not planned for any of this. We usually do, she said. I thought you might, he replied. Calderon watches carefully. And remembers, Frances said. A faint smile touched his mouth. I hope the rest of your day is quieter, he said. After this, Frances replied, adjusting Lily in her arms. I would welcome it. He bowed, proper, restrained, and turned back toward the central court. Frances watched him go only a moment before turning back toward Calderon. The suite would be waiting. Beatrice would be anxious. Lily would need settling. And yet, as Frances walked, she felt the cost of the day sharpening rather than easing. Because the retreat was no longer something happening around her, it was something she was now inside, and she knew the cricket field would make that impossible to ignore. By the time Frances reached the cricket grounds, the retreat had rearranged itself. Not physically. The lawns were the same wide sweep of winter green, the pavilion unchanged, but socially. People stood where they meant to be seen. Voices carried on purpose. Laughter arrived a beat too early or too late, depending on who was listening. Frances felt it the moment she stepped into view. House banners marked the field like quiet claims. Crimson and gold for Aurelius. Deep iron blue for Bellator. Calderon's silver and slate ribbon was present but modest, tied near the far benches, where observers gathered rather than competitors. "Everyone comes to cricket," Beatrice murmured, settling beside her. "Even the ones who pretend not to care." Timothy scanned the field with interest. "Because people remember who watches as much as who wins." Frances kept her gaze forward. The air smelled of cut grass and cold sun. Applause rippled as players took their places, jackets shed, sleeves rolled with practiced ease. And then she saw him. He stood with the Aurelius side, relaxed but unmistakable, not louder than the others, not more animated, simply steady, as if the field oriented itself around him without asking. Frances did not move. She did not smile. She did not wave. She did not lean forward. She watched, the way she had learned to watch 4 winters in a row. "Don't stare," Beatrice whispered immediately. "I'm not," Frances replied. "You absolutely are." Timothy squinted. "He's good." "How can you tell?" Beatrice asked. "He's not showing off." Frances exhaled slowly. That was true. Some men played for applause. Some played to dominate. He played as if the rules mattered, as if restraint was part of the skill. The match began. Cricket at Thornley was less chaos and more ceremony. Strategy unfolded slowly. Each run earned felt deliberate. Conversation ebbed and flowed with the rhythm of play. Commentary, passing between spectators like a second game layered over the first. "He favors control over speed," someone near them remarked. "Bellator will push him," another replied. "They always do." Frances listened without looking away. Aurelius batted first. The prince took his place with quiet confidence, testing the weight of the bat, adjusting his stance once, only once, before lifting his gaze. For a brief, startling second, his eyes found her. Not accidentally, not vaguely, deliberately. Frances felt the awareness land like a held breath. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply acknowledged, and then looked away. The ball was bowled. Applause followed the strike. Conversation resumed. But something had shifted. "He knows you're here," Beatrice said under her breath, pleased. Frances's hands folded tighter in her lap. "He knows many people are here. But he looked at you." Timothy leaned forward. That was intentional. Frances said nothing. If she spoke, she might betray herself. She had learned that silence preserved more than denial ever could. The match pressed on. Aurelius played cleanly. Bellator answered with force. Chairs rose, fell, reorganized themselves by house allegiance. Frances became acutely aware of where she stood. Who stood near her? Who noticed? A woman from Bellator glanced her way, curious, assessing. A man behind them murmured, "Calderon observes, as always." Frances straightened slightly. So that was how it read. Watching was a position. Silence, a statement. The prince took the field again. This time, when he scored, he did not look for applause. He looked toward the benches, not directly at her, not openly, but close enough that the intent was unmistakable. It was not a promise. It was not even an invitation. It was recognition. Frances felt the cost of it immediately. If he saw her, others would begin to see her too. "Well," Beatrice said, unable to contain herself any longer, "this has become interesting." Frances did not respond. She was thinking of her father, of Mr. Hawthorne, of expectations that did not care who caught whose eye on a cricket field. She was thinking of the stew that had not yet been cooked, and of the fact that being noticed was not the same as being chosen, but it was never without consequence. The match ended without ceremony. No decisive victory, just polite clapping, murmured analysis, people already shifting toward the next engagement. As the crowd dispersed, Frances rose with her siblings. She did not look back, but she felt it, the quiet certainty that something had been set in motion, and that before the day was done, she would be required to decide what it meant to be seen. The Calderon wing was silent. It was the only reason Frances stood at the glass doors of the conservatory at 2 a.m. The rest of Thornley, the Aurelius wing, the great hall, would still be drinking and gambling, but here the air was still. She pushed the door open, seeking the cold draught to settle her mind. A shadow moved by the far windows. Frances gasped, stepping back. "Peace," a voice said from the dark. "I'm not a ghost." A match flared. A candle was lit, illuminating the face of the Prince of Denmark. Frances stared at him. He was miles from where he should be. "You're in the Calderon wing," she said, her voice shaking. He shook out the match. "I am. This is a long way from House Aurelius." "Aurelius is loud," he said. He looked tired, his coat discarded on a bench, sleeves rolled up. "I required silence. Your wing seemed the only place to find it." Frances pulled her shawl tighter. "You traveled across the grounds just to stand in our conservatory." "I traveled across the grounds to hear myself think." He looked at her. "And yet I seem to have found company. I can leave." "Stay." It was a command, though his voice was low. He moved closer, the candlelight flickering against the glass. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "No." "The match?" "The noise," she lied. He smiled faintly. "You're a terrible liar, Frances." Her heart hammered. "You know my name." "I make it my business to know the names of the people who watch me. I don't—" "You observed me today," he cut in. "From the benches. You and your gray ribbon. My house observes. It is what we do." "And what did you see?" He was standing too close now. The distance of the vast estate had vanished. There was only the 3 feet of space between them. "I saw that you didn't want to be there," she whispered. His expression shifted. The guard came down just an inch. "You see too much," he said softly. "I should go." "Why?" "Because you came here for silence," she said, backing away. "And because you are likely waiting for someone else." The air changed instantly. The softness snapped shut. "Someone else?" "I'm sure the silence isn't the only draw," Frances said, trying to sound worldly, trying to protect herself. "A carriage ride this late? You must have an appointment. I wouldn't want to intrude on a tryst." The prince stared at her. "Is that what you think this is?" "I only meant that I rode across the snow in the middle of the night for a sordid meeting." "I didn't say sordid. You didn't have to." He turned away, blowing out the candle, plunging them back into moonlight. "Go back to bed, Frances." "Your Highness?" "I said go." The dismissal was like a slap. Frances stood for a second, trembling, realizing she had taken his vulnerability and insulted it with her own insecurity. "Good night," she whispered. She turned and ran back toward the corridor. In the dark of the conservatory, the prince watched her go, standing in the silence he had traveled miles to find, which now felt louder than any crowd. The next morning, the silence from the conservatory seemed to have followed Frances into the breakfast room. The sun was bright, the snow blinding against the glass, but the air at the Brookstone table was heavy. "You look pale," her mother said, pausing with her teacup halfway to her lips. "Did you not sleep?" Frances stared at her plate. The wind was loud. "It was a still night," Timothy noted, buttering toast with precision. "Eat," the Duke said from the head of the table. He didn't look up from his correspondence. "You will need your strength. I have arranged it." Frances went still. "Arranged what?" "The dinner," he said. "Tomorrow evening, for Mr. Hawthorne." The toast turned to ash in Frances's mouth. "Tomorrow." "He is eager," the Duke said, finally looking at her. "He asked after you specifically this morning. He remembers the stew fondly. I told him you would prepare it personally in our private suite. Father, It is a gesture, Frances," he cut in. His voice was calm, but the weight was there. A domestic gesture. Men like Hawthorne want to know they are marrying a wife, not just a title. You will cook, he will eat. We will settle the details before the winter ball. And if I refuse? The table went quiet. Beatrice stopped chewing. The Duke smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You are a Brookstone. We do not refuse duty. He stood, gathering his papers. Check the kitchen supplies today. Ensure you have your herbs. I want no excuses. He left the room. Frances let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 4 years. It's just soup, Beatrice whispered, trying to help. It's a trap, Frances said. She stood abruptly. I need air. She fled the suite, needing to put distance between herself and the kitchen that was waiting to seal her fate. She walked blindly, ending up on the western colonnade, a long stone walkway that connected the wings. It was crowded. Guests were moving between the riding grounds and the tea rooms. Frances! Verena caught her arm. Slow down. You look like you're marching to war. I feel like it, Frances muttered. Well, stop. Look. Verena nodded toward the courtyard below. The Aurelius riders are returning. Frances froze. Below them, a group of men were dismounting. The prince was at the front. He looked impeccable, boots polished, coat sharp, but his expression was stormy. He snapped a command to a groom, his patience clearly thin. He looks totally terrifying today, Verena noted. I heard he snapped at a duchess over breakfast. Did he? Frances whispered. Apparently she asked if he slept well, and he looked at her as if she'd insulted his ancestors. As if sensing the gaze, the prince looked up. Across the distance of the courtyard, his eyes locked onto Frances. There was no warmth, no secret recognition like the cricket match, no vulnerability like the conservatory. There was only ice. He sees you, Verena hissed. Curtsy. Frances dipped into a curtsy, her heart hammering against her ribs. The prince watched her rise. He held her gaze for 1 second, long enough to make sure she felt the cut, and then turned his back completely, striding toward the Aurelius wing without a backward glance. Chilly, Verena murmured. I thought you said he was polite in the corridor. I was wrong, Frances said, her voice hollow. She watched the empty archway where he had vanished. She had insulted him, she had pushed him away, and now he was done with her. Come on, Verena said, linking their arms. Let's go see the horses. It will cheer you up. Frances turned away, but the cold stayed with her. He was gone, and tomorrow Mr. Hawthorne was coming to dinner. Frances looked down at her hands. The choice was gone. If she wanted to save herself, she couldn't wait for a prince who wouldn't look at her. She had to save herself. Verena, she said softly. Do you know where I can find bitter leaf? Verena frowned. The herb? It tastes awful. Why? Frances stared straight ahead. For a recipe, she said. I need to make sure it's unforgettable. The bitter leaf fell into the pot. It was a small act, just a pinch of green dust vanishing into the dark, rich broth. But it felt like a scream. Frances stirred it in, once, twice. This wasn't seasoning. It was sabotage. It smells different, Timothy said from the doorway. It smells like a mistake, Beatrice added, wrinkling her nose. It smells like freedom, Frances corrected, though her hand shook as she set the spoon down. She looked at the stew. It was the exact dish Mr. Hawthorne claimed to adore. He had praised it for years, using it as a metaphor for her suitability as a wife. Comforting, reliable, consistent. Tonight it was none of those things. Tonight it was sharp enough to ruin a palate and, hopefully, a proposal. The door to the kitchen suite opened. Lady Frances, the butler said, bowing low. Your father requests the service. The guest has arrived. Frances wiped her hands on her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Is he seated? He is, my lady. They are waiting. Go, she told the twins. I will bring the tureen myself. She lifted the heavy ceramic pot. The steam curled around her face, carrying the faint, acrid scent of the bitter leaf. It was too late to take it back now. The weapon was loaded. She walked down the short hallway to the private dining room. Every step felt heavy. She prepared her speech in her head. "Oh, Mr. Hawthorne, is it not to your liking? I must have blundered in the kitchen. How clumsy of me." It was a small humiliation to prevent a lifetime of misery. She reached the dining room door. She could hear her father's voice booming inside, jovial and loud. "A man of taste, indeed. We are delighted you could step in." Frances took a breath. She pushed the door open with her hip. "Dinner is served," she announced, keeping her eyes on the heavy tureen as she set it onto the center of the table. "Ah, Frances," her father cried. "Just in time. I was just explaining to our guest how you prepare this specifically for special occasions." Frances straightened, forcing a smile, and turned to face Mr. Hawthorne. But the chair at the head of the table was not occupied by Mr. Hawthorne. The man sitting there, napkin already in his lap, looking up at her with an expression of polite curiosity, was not the man she hated. It was the prince. Frances froze. The blood drained from her face so fast the room spun. "Your Highness," the Duke beamed, gesturing between them. "I believe you've met my daughter, Frances. Since poor Hawthorne took ill, His Highness was gracious enough to join us. He mentioned he had a fondness for stew." The prince looked at Frances. He looked at the tureen. He looked back at her. He didn't know. He thought this was a kindness. He thought he was saving the evening. "It smells unique," the prince said, reaching for the ladle. "No," Frances gasped. The room went silent. Her father frowned. "Frances?" She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. If she stopped him, she would have to explain why the stew was ruined. She would have to admit she tried to poison a suitor. Her father would be humiliated. The scandal would be instant, but if she didn't stop him... The prince watched her panic. He saw the terror in her eyes. He paused, the ladle hovering over the bowl. He was smart. He knew something was wrong. Frances whispered, her voice trembling. It might not be to your liking, Your Highness. It was an experiment." The prince's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at her white knuckles gripping the chair. Then he looked at the stew. He understood. He didn't know what she had done, but he knew she was terrified of her father finding out. He could expose her. He could ask why she was panicking. Instead, he smiled. A calm, terrifyingly polite smile. "I enjoy experiments, Lady Frances," he said. And before she could move, he poured the dark, tainted broth into his bowl. He lifted the spoon. Frances wanted to close her eyes. She wanted to scream. He put the spoon to his lips and swallowed. The taste was immediate. The prince froze. Frances stopped breathing. She watched the spoon enter his mouth, watched his throat work, and waited for the reaction. It should have been disgust. The bitter leaf was potent. It was designed to make a grown man choke. It was designed to drive a suitor out of the house. But the prince didn't choke. His eyes watered. Just once, a betraying shimmer of physiological shock. But his expression remained made of stone. He lowered the spoon slowly. He looked at Frances. He knew. In that split second of silence, a communication passed between them that was louder than any shout. He realized exactly what she had done. He realized this dinner was a trap, and he had walked right into it. "Well," the Duke boomed, oblivious to the silent warfare at his table. "The verdict, Your Highness. Frances has a heavy hand with the herbs, but Hawthorne swears by it." Frances gripped the edge of the table. This was it. He would expose her. He would push the bowl away, ask what was in it, and her father would taste it. The prince turned to the Duke. He had every reason to speak. He picked up his spoon again. "It is..." The prince's voice was rough, slightly strained. He cleared his throat. "It is a very bold flavor." The Duke laughed, delighted. "Bold? Yes, that is Frances. Never boring." "No," the prince said, his eyes sliding back to Frances. They were dark, with a mixture of amusement and pain. "She is certainly not that." He took another bite. Frances felt her knees go weak. "Stop," She wanted to scream. "You don't have to do this." But he did. He ate the stew. Not quickly, and not with pleasure, but with a mechanical, terrifying determination. He ate it because if he stopped, her father would taste it. He was drinking poison to save her from a scolding. "More wine, Your Highness?" the Duke offered. "Please," the prince said. "Immediately." He drained the glass. He scraped the bottom of the bowl. When he finally set the spoon down, he looked pale. "Delicious," the Duke declared, slapping the table. "I knew it. A triumph, Francis." "A triumph," the prince repeated. His voice was a little hoarse. He stood up abruptly. "The room is warm," he said. "It is the fire," the Duke said. "I shall have the window opened." "No," the prince said. He looked at Francis. The playful, dangerous spark was back in his eyes. "I find I require fresh air and a guide." Francis froze. "Francis," the prince said, and it wasn't a request. "Walk with me." The Duke beamed. "Go, of course. Show His Highness the winter garden. It's lovely in the moonlight." Francis stood, her legs trembling. She moved to the door. The prince held it open for her. As she passed him, he leaned down. His breath was warm against her ear, and his whisper was low, lethal, and laced with the faint scent of bitter leaf. "If you ever cook for me again," he whispered, "I will have you arrested." Francis flushed scarlet. He didn't wait. He offered his arm, stiff and formal, and led her out of the dining room, away from her father, and into the dark. The night air struck Francis like a shock. Cool, clean, sharp enough to clear the taste of stew and panic from her mouth. They moved into the covered arcade that led toward the winter garden, lantern light thinning as the sounds of the house dulled behind them. The warmth of the dining rooms faded. Stone replaced carpet. Silence replaced laughter. The prince released her arm. For several steps, neither of them spoke. Francis's heart was still racing, her thoughts colliding faster than she could steady them. She could feel it now, the cost of what she had done settling in her bones. He stopped walking. "So," he said at last, his voice low and stripped of ceremony, "this was not an accident." She turned to face him. "I never meant—" She stopped. The excuse sounded hollow even to her. "I never meant for you to be there." His jaw tightened. "That is not what I asked." "No," she said softly. He nodded once, as if confirming a wound he had been pressing for years. "Then answer this, Lady Francis. Do you despise me so deeply that you would rather ruin a meal than allow me to sit at your father's table?" The words were not sharp. That was worse. "I do not despise you," she said quickly. "I never have." A faint, humorless breath left him. "You could have fooled me." She frowned. "Fooled you?" "For years," he said, turning away a step beneath the arches. "You vanish when I enter a room. You look through me as if I am an inconvenience. The one time you spoke freely to me, you implied I was loitering in a wing for pleasure." Heat rushed to her face. "I thought—" "Yes," he interrupted, then stopped himself. "You thought." The silence tightened between them. Then understanding struck her, sudden and awful. "You believe," she said slowly, "that the stew was meant for you." He looked at her. "Was it not?" "No." Her voice wavered. "It was for Mr. Hawthorne." The name settled heavily between them. "My father," she continued, forcing the words out, "believes him suitable. He intended the dinner for him. I was meant to impress." His expression shifted. Not anger now, but something darker. "And you altered the dish," he said quietly, "to prevent that." "Yes." "You risked disgrace." "I risked a lifetime," she said, her restraint finally breaking. "I had no other power." Her eyes burned. She turned away, ashamed of the tears that slipped free. "I did not think," she whispered, "that I mattered enough for anyone to notice." He moved before she realized she had stepped back. Her heel caught. The world tilted. His hands were there instantly, steady, firm, certain, one arm anchoring her shoulders, the other bracing her back. He did not let her fall. She gasped, fingers clutching his coat as the tremor she had been holding finally escaped her. She shook, breath hitching, tears spilling despite her effort to stop them. "I did not mean to hurt you," she said brokenly. "I would never—" "I know," he said. The words surprised them both. She felt his breath near her hair, warm against the cold. His hold tightened, not improper, not demanding, simply protective. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he spoke again. "Do you still have the red hat?" She froze. "The one," he continued, his voice steady now, deliberate, "with the blue peacock feather. You wore it 3 years ago, on the second afternoon of the retreat." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "How?" she whispered. "Could you possibly know that?" A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "Because I noticed you," he said. Her breath caught. "That hat," he went on, not unkindly, "was absurdly unfashionable even then, and yet you wore it as though it were a crown." She stared at him, stunned. "That was years ago. Those hats are no longer—" "I know," he said. "I remember." The space between them felt suddenly charged, every assumption she had ever made trembling at the edges. "You think," he said quietly, "that I have not seen you." Her voice was barely sound. "You never spoke to me." "And you disappeared," he replied. "Every time I tried." The truth of it landed hard. They stood there, the weight of years pressing into the present. "This," he said at last, releasing her gently and stepping back just enough to restore propriety, "changes more than you realize." Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere beyond the arcade. Reality crept back in. "We should return," he said, "before questions are asked." Frances nodded, though her heart had not slowed. As they turned toward the light, his voice stopped her once more. "You did not poison me because you hate me." "No." "Good," he said, "because that would have been easier to understand." Then he walked ahead of her, and Frances knew with a clarity that frightened her more than the stew ever had. This was only the beginning. They did not return to the dining rooms immediately. Instead, they stopped where the arcade opened into the edge of the winter garden. Glass walls rising to the dark, lantern light reflecting faintly off frost-kissed leaves. It was not private enough to be improper. It was not public enough to be interrupted. Frances stood with her hands folded tightly in front of her, trying to steady herself. "You think," the prince said at last, "that my noticing you began with a hat." She looked up, startled. "Did it not?" A faint, pained smile touched his mouth. "No." He turned slightly, resting one hand against the stone column beside him, as if grounding himself before continuing. "It began the year before that," he said. "The first winter I attended the retreat." Her heart skipped. "You remember that year?" "I remember you," he replied simply. She swallowed. "I don't recall doing anything remarkable." He glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "You walked the length of the East Terrace barefoot." Her breath caught. "It had snowed the night before," he continued. "Your shoe tore at the seam. Anyone else would have sent for a maid. You did not." Her cheeks warmed. "It was only a short distance." "You held your head high," he said, "as though dignity were not something that could be taken from you." She laughed weakly. "I was furious. And magnificent," he said. Silence followed, thick, trembling. "I watched you," he went on, his voice quieter now, "because you never seemed to notice you were being watched. You helped an elderly lady find her rooms when everyone else was too busy pretending not to see her confusion." Frances's eyes stung. She had lost her way. She had lost her memory, he corrected gently. "You stayed with her until she felt safe." She looked down, blinking hard. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said. "They did not." The truth of that settled painfully between them. "I wanted to speak to you," he continued, more than once. "Then why didn't you?" she asked, the question trembling on the edge of accusation. He exhaled slowly. "Because every time I entered a room, you left it." Her heart twisted. "I thought you despised me." He shook his head. I thought you did. They stared at one another, the symmetry of it almost unbearable. I convinced myself, he said, that your silence was judgment, that you found me presumptuous simply for existing near you. That was never... She stopped, pressing her lips together. I was shy, and I, he said quietly, was a fool. The words hung heavy. You were not here last year, Francis said suddenly. I noticed. His gaze dropped. For the first time, something like vulnerability crossed his features. I could not endure it, he admitted. Loving someone who seemed to recoil from me. Her breath hitched. You loved... He lifted a hand, stopping her gently. Not yet. The restraint in his voice made her chest ache. I stayed away because it hurt less than hoping, he said. But this year, I told myself I would try again. I told myself I would endure your indifference. She stepped closer without realizing it. I was never indifferent. I know that now, he said. The bells from the far side of the estate rang softly, marking the hour. Francis hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her chest. Why me? He looked at her fully now. Because, he said carefully, you are kind when no one is watching. Because you carry yourself as though worth were not granted by approval. Because you would rather walk barefoot than bow. Tears slipped free then, unstoppable. She laughed through them, shaking her head. You are a prince. There are women here who would do anything to marry you. Yes, he said, but they are not you. Her breath shuddered. She searched his face, still uncertain, still afraid. And yet you say all this as though it changes nothing. It changes everything, he replied softly. Just not all at once. He stepped back then, not away, but enough to restore distance, to remind them both of the world waiting beyond the glass. I cannot ask more of you tonight, he said, and you cannot give it. Her heart ached at the truth of it. Good night, Lady Francis, he said, inclining his head. Good night, she whispered. He turned and walked back toward the light, leaving her alone with the sound of her own unsteady breathing. Francis stood there long after he was gone. She pressed a hand to her chest and realized, with a mixture of wonder and fear, she had never truly been unseen. And loving him might cost her far more than avoiding Hawthorne ever had. Francis did not sleep. She lay awake in the dark of her room, listening to the distant hush of the estate settling around her, the soft echo of footsteps in far corridors, the wind brushing the high windows, the quiet life of a place too large ever to be fully still. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, not as a prince, as a man who remembered a foolish hat, as a man who had noticed when she thought herself invisible. By morning, she felt hollowed out and painfully alive all at once. She avoided him that day, not from fear, but because if she saw him again, she was no longer certain she would remember how to keep her distance. The retreat pressed on regardless. Games filled the lawns. Conversations layered over one another in drawing rooms and galleries. Suitors hovered where they always had. Some familiar, some newly emboldened by the subtle shift they sensed in her. Francis endured them with polite attention, answering when spoken to, smiling when required. But her mind was elsewhere. It was not until evening, when the house turned golden with lamplight and the guests dispersed into smaller, quieter clusters, that she found herself alone again. She had meant only to step onto the terrace for air. Instead, she found him. He stood near the balustrade, coat unbuttoned, hands braced against the stone as he looked out over the darkened gardens. He did not turn immediately. Perhaps he heard her. Perhaps he had known she would come. Lady Francis, he said quietly. She stopped a few steps behind him. Your Highness. He turned then, and something in his face told her he had not slept either. I should apologize, he said. Her brows knit. For what? For not letting you answer last night. Her pulse quickened. You asked me why I would not marry Mr. Hawthorne, and I did not wait for the truth. She hesitated, then spoke softly. I would not marry him because I do not love him. He nodded, as if bracing himself. And, she continued, heart pounding, because I cannot pretend affection where none exists, not even to please my father. Silence followed, dense and intimate. And what of me? He asked at last. The question was not entitled. It was vulnerable. Francis stepped closer. You already know. His breath caught. I know that you admired me. I loved you, she corrected gently. In silence, in ignorance, in foolishness. He let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. And something else, deeper. I thought, he said quietly, that you had already judged me and found me wanting. She shook her head. I thought you had dismissed me as insignificant. They stared at one another, the weight of years pressing into the present. I have tried, he said, his voice low, to be everything a prince must be. But loving you has been the least controlled thing I have ever done. Her eyes filled. You cannot mean. He stepped closer. I do, he said, and I will not pretend otherwise. She trembled then, not from fear, but from the sudden collapse of every wall she had built. He lifted a hand, hesitating a fraction of a second, giving her time to step away. She did not. His fingers brushed her cheek. Light, reverent, wiping away a tear she had not felt fall. Francis, he said, her name a question and a promise all at once. She answered by closing the distance. The kiss was not hurried. It was not reckless. It was the softest collision of breath and certainty. Tentative at first, then deeper, as if both of them were afraid it might vanish if held too tightly. When they parted, her forehead rested against his chest. He exhaled slowly. That answers everything. No, she said faintly. It answers only us. He smiled at that. Sad, knowing. You're right, he said. The world remained. She stepped back reluctantly, the ache immediate and sharp. We cannot, she began. Not yet, he agreed. And not without cost. Footsteps sounded faintly from the terrace entrance. They turned instinctively apart, composure sliding back into place, though neither of them fully succeeded. He bowed, formal once more. Good evening, Lady Frances. She curtsied. Your Highness. To any watcher, it would have looked ordinary. But as he passed her, his voice brushed her ear, low, certain. I am done pretending. Then he was gone. Frances stood alone beneath the lantern light, her lips still warm, her future suddenly dangerous in ways she had never imagined. Because now she knew the truth, and the truth would not be easily taken from her. By morning, the retreat had begun to whisper. Not loudly, not crudely, but enough. Frances felt it in the way conversations paused when she approached, in the way her father's gaze lingered longer than usual, assessing rather than approving, in the sudden attentiveness of men who had previously overlooked her. Truth, once discovered, had a way of altering the air. Mr. Hawthorne returned just before luncheon. He arrived pale, apologetic, and eager to reclaim the evening he believed illness had stolen from him. Frances watched from across the hall as her father greeted him warmly, already smoothing the inconvenience away. There it was, the life waiting to close around her again. Her father found her an hour later, just as she was preparing to walk with her mother along the upper terrace. Frances, the Duke said, his tone pleasant but firm. A word? She nodded. Of course. They stopped where the stone overlooked the gardens below. From here, the retreat unfolded in orderly splendor, games in progress, guests strolling, the illusion of ease perfectly maintained. I had hoped, her father said, that last night's dinner might encourage clarity. Her heart steadied. This was the moment. It did, she replied. He looked at her sharply. Then you will give Mr. Hawthorne the attention he deserves. No, Frances said quietly. The word landed without tremor. Her father stared. No, I will not marry him, she continued, nor will I pretend interest to spare embarrassment. His expression hardened. You would risk public disappointment? Speculation? I would risk myself, she said, and I will not do so again. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, her mother spoke. "She is not refusing lightly," the Duchess said, her voice calm. "Look at her." The Duke did. Perhaps for the first time he truly saw his daughter, not defiant, not foolish, but resolved. "And what," he asked finally, "has emboldened you so suddenly?" Francis met his gaze. "I have learned that silence does not protect me. It only invites decisions made in my absence." The truth of that struck deeper than argument ever could. Behind them, footsteps approached. The prince did not interrupt. He waited, respectful, distant, until Francis turned and acknowledged him. "Your Grace," he said to her father, bowing properly. "Forgive the intrusion." The Duke straightened, all calculation now. "Your Highness." "I wished," the prince said evenly, "to inform you that I intend to make my interest in your daughter known. Publicly. Respectfully. With her consent, or not at all." Francis's breath caught. Her father's gaze flicked between them. "This is unexpected," the Duke said carefully. "Only because I've been patient," the prince replied. Silence followed. Then the Duke exhaled slowly. "Very well." Francis blinked. "Papa, you will not be coerced," he said gruffly. "Nor will I invite scandal by forcing a match unwanted on both sides." He looked at the prince. "If you wish to court my daughter, you will do so properly." The prince inclined his head. "I would accept nothing less." That afternoon, the retreat watched something shift. Not an announcement, not a spectacle, but a choice. Francis walked beside the prince through the winter garden, at a distance that was proper, at a pace that was unmistakably deliberate. Conversations paused, eyes followed, assumptions recalibrated. She felt no urge to hide. When they reached the far end of the path, he stopped. "I will not rush you," he said quietly. "Nor will I ask you to sacrifice yourself for me." She smiled, soft, certain. "I will not ask you to pretend either." His gaze warmed. "Then we begin as equals." "Yes," she said. "We do." They stood there, the world rearranging itself around a truth that had finally been spoken. That evening, as the retreat gathered for music and light, Frances wore no elaborate adornment, only herself. And when she caught the prince watching her from across the room, no longer in secret, no longer in silence, she felt no fear, only gratitude, because she had not been chosen. She had chosen, and this time the future did not close like a door. It opened.
I saw you first where the lanterns dimmed, where voices blurred into polite applause.
You stood apart, your hands too still, as if the world had already asked too much.
I learned to look away from eyes like yours, men born knowing they would always be chosen.
I kept my steps, measured my gaze low, certain I was invisible by design. We loved in silence years too long, each thinking the other never saw. I hid my heart, you hid your hope, while time kept quietly moving on. But love remembers what we forget, and truth survives what fear once taught. We stood so close yet worlds apart, until the moment we were called. You think a crown does what a man can feel, that rank makes noticing impossible.
But I counted the days by where you stood, and the nights by what you never said.
mistook your calm for indifference, your distance for practiced disdain.
So I turned my shoulder when you passed
and called it dignity, not pain. We loved in silence years too long, each thinking the other never saw. I hid my heart, you hid your hope, while time kept quietly moving on. But love remembers what we forget, and truth survives what fear once taught. We stood so close yet worlds apart, until the moment we were caught.
There was a morning, winter bright. You wore red against the pale of snow.
A foolish thing, perhaps, to remember, but some moments refuse to go.
You speak of a hat I barely recall, as if it were a vow I made.
But the way your voice trembles now tells me how closely you stay.
I watched you without daring to hope,
believing I was wrong to want.
I loved you while pretending not to see,
certain you would never look. I knew the curve of your hesitation, the way you left before the room could breathe.
I thought you turned away from me, not knowing you were guarding belief.
I never dreamed a man like you could notice what I tried to hide. So I fled the kindness in your eyes before my heart could be betrayed. We loved in silence years too long, each thinking the other never saw. I hid my heart, you hid your hope, while time kept quietly moving on. But love remembers what we forget, and truth survives what fear once taught. We stood so close yet worlds apart, until the moment we were caught. If I had known you saw me then, I would have stayed, I would have tried. But love taught me to be careful first and brave only in hindsight. Then hear me now, with nothing held, no rank, no silence left to save. I have seen you for 4 long years, and loved you, every one of them.
Yeah, not even 5 minutes, probably.